Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Smith. I'm the subcourse director of the International Security subcourse, and I'm here with my colleague, Dr. Suzanne Levi-Sanchez, and she's going to be speaking in her personal capacity on her personal time. And we are going to discuss the recent events in Afghanistan and potentially some effects with Central Asia. So as a sort of basic statement, everything that's said today between us is these are our views only, and they do not represent our employer at any stage. The date is 20 August 2021. We are about a week into the events in Afghanistan, the withdrawal of the US, the fall of the Afghan government, the fall of the Afghan army. And so it's quite a dramatic time. So this is a really great opportunity to gain some insights from a colleague whom I consider a great expert in this part of the world. So welcome, Susie. And so I guess we'll start off with just in general, what are some general reactions that you've had in the past week, given the events that have transpired and of course are ongoing, especially at the Kabul International Airport, et cetera?
I've had hundreds of Afghans reaching out to me, begging for help. I'm part of several groups that are assisting in trying to get Afghans help and out. There's numerous ways Afghans can fill out forms online and whatnot, but a lot of them don't have access, and the Taliban are searching them and they can't get to the airport. And even there's some, I was posting some ways for the Afghans to get to the military side of the airport at Kabul yesterday and today. Those have now been shut down, and the Taliban are whipping and beating people, and they are also searching Afghan security forces, interpreters, intelligence workers, and others. And they promise not to take revenge, but they are. And I have many, many friends in hiding and taking revenge or getting revenge taken on them. So it's very disturbing. On July 4th, when the Taliban first took over the certain northern border districts, all but two, I believe, but then there's kind of a cascading effect. But they started in northeastern Badakhshan. My local contacts there who have family in the Afghan military told me that their military family members were told to stand down by Ashraf Ghani, and that he wanted them to make a tactical retreat. So they were told to go to Tajikistan.
Oh, okay. And
there were agreements made between, at least in the district, the Wakhan. In particular, there was an agreement made between the Taliban commanders and the local leaders to let the Taliban take control and choose a district leader. In exchange for that, there was no bloodshed. And in many ways, they have left some of those districts more alone than they have in other districts. They did go and destroy, from what I understand, the police headquarters in Khandud, which is in the middle of the Wakhan, in order to sort of assert control, and then they left again. It seems that they don't really want to be in those remote areas because it's difficult. So they sort of went in and left. That's one thing. The other thing is the situation at the airport seems to be day by day. The reporting and from reports from colleagues and friends there, it's getting more and more chaotic. And so getting the many thousands of Afghans out that we promised to get out is looking harder and harder. For example, a friend of mine who he taught me Dari and Pashto for free. And at the same time, he was working with our special operations forces teaching them Dari and Pashto. And then in order to get American US citizenship, he joined the US military and served time. And then he got his citizenship, and his brother served in the former Afghan parliament. And he can't get his brother out, and his brother's now hiding, and the Taliban went to his house searching for him. So he might be able to get to Russia. So we're trying, what a lot of expats working on this are saying is that they're telling Afghans, get out of the country, however you can get out of the country if you have an alternative way, and we'll sort out the visa issues later. Because the Taliban, while they promise not to take revenge, I personally don't think they have control over all their groups. And they certainly don't seem to have control over their foreign fighters that have come in to help them. So that's highly problematic. I mean, I think that when I look, the Taliban has become more cohesive, as Antonio Gustiosi has done really good analysis on this, but to borrow from him, over the years, they've consolidated in many ways. And I watched this when I was in Badakhshan. They had shadow governments across ethnic groups and across tribes, so it wasn't just Pashtuns anymore. It was a pretty diverse array of groups, but they didn't really have enough fighters to take over the whole northern border area. So that from what's been reported is they brought in Tajik fighters from Tajikistan, Uzbek fighters from Uzbekistan, Uyghurs, some IS, there was some Al-Qaeda, there's kind of this mishmash. And, many of those fighters are, they're sort of IS friendly or IS affiliates, Islamic State affiliates to an extent. So they don't really have allegiance to the Taliban. And the way the Taliban have worked is they will, if a fighter works for them, when a fighter takes over a village or an area, this sort of bounty from that area belongs to the fighters. So if a Tajik militia allegedly, Radio Free Liberté reported, Jamaat Ansarullah, which used to be part of the Tajik resistance groups, I'm forgetting, I'm blanking on the name of the group, but it doesn't matter. So Jamaat Ansarullah, if those fighters from Tajikistan were really in the north controlling the Friendship Bridge and a couple of those border crossing points, there's a couple interesting things about that, right? That means they're also controlling the drug trafficking networks. I mean, not networks, but the actual trafficking that crosses those borders. From my research, and this is, a rough estimate, but often there's about a 10% cut that comes across that border of the trafficking in some way, but it depends. There's all kinds of different agreements and arrangements. So whoever controls the border crossing points is getting a fairly large piece of the multi-billion-dollar drug trafficking pie. So if these Tajik militants are controlling, let's say, 2 or 3 of those border crossing points, that's a pretty large amount of money that foreign fighters are going to be controlling. And what are they going to do with that? Because I can't imagine that the Taliban are going to be able to completely control them. So therefore, are they going to become comfortable and move into those districts and villages and sort of assert their own version of Sharia, which is different across the Taliban? Are they going to go back to their countries and use those funding streams to do something there? Are they going to support the Uyghur cause? Are they going to, nobody knows what's going to happen with that.
Yeah.
But it's important to watch very carefully. And I do believe that the Taliban, as far as I can tell from reporting and from talking to many sources, the Taliban have made agreements with China, Russia, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Pakistan.
And what's the nature of the agreements?
The agreement is if you keep control of these groups and there's no spillover into our countries and across the border, we will accept you as the government.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right. So the Taliban have an incentive to keep whatever it is within their state. And frankly, that's what the Taliban want. The Taliban do not want to expand, but these other groups.
But like you said, they may not control them. So
That's
even
right. That's the problem.
Okay. Even
and I do believe that Russia and China will get involved if these groups begin to spill over, but I don't know what that's going to look like either.
Can you give me a sense, because I know you've traveled around there. When we look at the map there, we see these clearly demarcated borders, including the sort of odd expansion to China. Afghanistan touches Xinjiang there. What are on the ground? Are the borders real? Are there gates or walls or fences, border guards? Is it porous or is it non-porous? Or is it's situational? It just depends on where you are on the border.
Yes.
Okay.
So I can give you some very specific examples. Can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Okay. So in this tiny little area here, and I do have another map I could share, but I won't. So in this tiny little area along here, which is from what's called, where my cursor is, Sarhad Brughel, all the way over to this part of the border. So from here to there, there's, let me think, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6 formal crossing points. Those are staffed. They're controlled. Even the Taliban are controlling right now the Afghan side, and the Tajiks are controlling the Tajik side. And it is, you got to go across a bridge. It's formal. You got to have papers, the whole thing. Even the Afghan side, which used to not have any kind of computer, the last time I went across, which was late 2015, they actually had a whole computerized system. I'm sure none of that's working right now. So the Taliban are going to have a very sort of a very different crossing regime, border regime, but it's still there. There were, on top of that, in that little area, 21 other informal crossings for humanitarian exchange, as well as other types of exchange. So there were numerous crossing points where, particularly in the Wakhan, where you could just kind of wade across the river. Go across. The local leaders had, they'd have dinner, they'd get across. And there's nobody guarding that. China, when you go up, it's very difficult, the terrain to get from this part up into China. So the Kyrgyz Pamiris, which live in this area, they finally lobbied Afghanistan to build a road along the little Pamirs into China. That road, very difficult. Afghanistan denies that China funded it at all. I have a very hard time believing that, because for China, it's a very useful back channel road for intelligence and other things and military to get through, particularly since China has a base. They have a base right here and right here in Afghanistan. So they have one on both sides of those borders. So that road for them, the problem with the road is part of it was after the first year of it being built, a portion of it already has been washed away.
Oh.
So now they need to rebuild it. And that's typical of these roads. I've been on so many roads where you're just like, oh, great. Well, now we're going through a river, But so, there's also in the mountains of Kyrgyzstan, like in, this mountainous areas, there's all kinds of ways to cross that are very difficult, but doable. I mean, there's also like a crossing point where I was in Afghanistan. I was in Zibak, which is about right here. And I walked to the head of the drug, the drug control, I forget, drug control committee or something, but he was also what was called the ASIAB, which is the flour grinder. So for the village. But that was right near the border of Pakistan. And had I simply gone a little further, I could have gotten into Pakistan. And there's no border crossing point there, from what I understand. There's another one down here, another border crossing point that people kind of go into Pakistan. It's like it's closed, but people go through. So I mean, I could go on and on about that. So bottom line is, there's formal crossing points, and there are indeed formal borders. I mean, up near China, when you get to the border there's like this little, like a little chicken wire fence in the middle of this moonscape in Morghab, and that's the border. So, you know, but if you cross the border, there's nothing there. Like, you know, it's not like you're going in there and then you're going to end up in a city. You're going to end up for a very long time going through 4,000 or 5,000 meter high moonscape. So, you know, they don't try to protect that one that much, but there are some trafficking networks, I believe, that exploit that.
So it seems the border porosity issue can work both ways. It can provide an outlet for people trying to flee if they know how to maneuver or go to the right place. It also provides a pathway for internal chaos inside Afghanistan to bleed over into other areas. I think that's one of the big concerns of neighboring states. So it seems like it's a double-edged sword in some ways.
But I do think that the Central Asian states have reinforced the border, and I think Russia's helping them. And so I would assume that at this point, those 21 informal crossing points, there's more patrolling going on.
Yeah.
And the way Tajikistan works is, if you arrive in Tajikistan, everybody, and you're an Afghan, it's not like they're going to take you in. You know, you're going to get reported, or someone in security. You know, there's people are working as assets for the government all over the place. Every building, every NGO, you'll get reported. So again, so there's other types of security networks.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that if someone in the middle of the night nefariously goes over the border or a little cell with the intent to cause damage, they can cause damage.
Yeah.
Right. Just like any insurgent group that's running a small situation. So there's that. But a lot of them, the ones that are associated with the drug trafficking networks, you know, they kind of want to keep the cash cow alive. So there's an incentive to not ruin that. I mean, when I was in Harok hanging out on the street, sometimes I'd go out because I'm crazy late at night. You know, I'd hang out midnight, 1 a.m., you know, and I don't drink. So, you know, I was never out there drunk or anything, but I'd hang out and, you know, there'd be Taliban on the street because Tajikistan was the sort of resort side. And you'd have drug traffickers, Taliban, you know, kind of, they left me alone completely.
But isn't it true that the Taliban states that they are against drug trafficking and they seek to eliminate that? Or is that just a cover story? Is that just fake?
My assessment of that has always been that when they limited the drug trafficking in the 90s, they did that to decrease supply, increase demand, and spike the prices. So the prices went way up. So they could look like the good guys, but really they were just stockpiling the drug. That's my assessment.
Okay.
I haven't been able to prove that. There are others who agree with that assessment. I do know that one of the local leaders along the Wakhan corridor, when I was working on the drug demand reduction program, I met with him. I've been in touch with him for a long time now, but he worked with the Mujahideen on drug demand reduction before they became Taliban. Because Ahmed Shah Massoud, so Ahmed Shah Massoud's family, from what I've been told in the field, they were largely in charge of the gemstone trafficking trade. So they partnered with some of these local leaders on drug demand reduction and addiction programs. So when the Taliban came into the Wakhan and met with that leader, one or two, there were only 4 cars that showed up to take over the entire district from the Taliban. 2 of those local leaders were former Mujahideen commanders. So this local leader from the Wakhan had been friends with, known them for many, many years because he had partnered with them on the drug demand reduction program. So there's complexity there, right? And so that limited any damage because he had this former relationship. But the drug trafficking, the Taliban, I drew a map in 2011 based on the villages that the Taliban was taken over. And I actually tracked all the villages were along the drug trafficking routes. And so they very strategically, over a long period of time, took over the routes. And so from what I understand, before they took over, they already controlled about 70% of the drug trafficking in the country. So they can say that or whatever, but the truth is they're getting a huge amount of their money from that. And so is Tajikistan, frankly, and Russia wants, in my opinion, Russia wants a piece of that pie, and the precursor chemicals, from what I understand, mostly come from China. And the other problem is there was, I think maybe a little less now, but there was an explosion of meth labs that were sprouting up, and locally grown ephedra is highly abundant throughout Afghanistan. So I do know our Air Force kept destroying those labs, but they were extremely mobile and easy to bring up. So the only thing is, where were they getting the chemicals? And many people say those chemicals were coming from China. So that whole sort of trafficking ring is complicated in and of itself. And prior to the fall of the Soviet Union, the Russians controlled the trafficking at the border. So they've kind of always wanted to come back and get a part of that again.
Okay.
And so now they're back.
Okay. I'm just curious about something that's, because here we are, August 20th, and the story is obviously evolving, but we have the situation at the airport and the story of thousands of U.S. nationals in Afghanistan who are unable to reach the airport. So I was wondering, who would these people likely be? I don't imagine Afghanistan as a tourism destination. So I'm assuming it's workers, or do you know, just given your experience, having spent time there, who would have been trapped? Or
there's hundreds of NGOs operating in Afghanistan. There's humanitarian organizations, there's scholars, there's missionary groups, there's educational, doing all kinds of good work, and they've been all over the place for a very long time. And from what I have read in my groups that are working on supporting getting Afghans out, there's also people posting about, so a lot of people are posting from Afghanistan in these support groups. And one thing that has been told, from what I understand, to the US citizens who are in Afghanistan, from what I understand, and again, it's hard to get really solid information, but so I'm going to caveat everything I've said. I'm doing the best I can, but it's hard. But the Americans are being told to stay in place until they're contacted to be escorted to the airport. So I think, from what I understand, they're being told not to just try to make their way to the airport because it's too dangerous and chaotic. So they're sheltering in place. Taliban have agreed not to attack Westerners. So for now, they haven't been attacked, from what I understand.
Okay.
And then the challenge is getting them through. They need an escort, and there's only so many US military personnel to do that.
Yes.
And with the airport being so, as the airport gets more and more chaotic, there's less and less military personnel to escort anybody. Right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of, it's really challenging. The other thing that I have heard reported, which I don't know, is that, you know, they don't seem to know the exact number of American US citizens still there. Because as the ambassador pointed out, some people don't register.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. They're there without knowledge of the embassy.
I didn't register. I mean, so when I went into Afghanistan, I mean, I had to cross the border, so I was registered in that sense. And there were people in Tajikistan that knew I was there, Tajiks, and there were Afghans protecting me. But I didn't call the embassy in Kabul. That was like, Kabul is like a different country when you're in the northern districts. It just doesn't really exist. You know, it's far away, you know. So I was never really in touch with the embassy, and I can imagine many NGO workers did that. I doubt that any of my other, there's a small group of colleagues that would go in and out. I don't think any of them registered ever. So, but I also know that, like in Badakhshan, all of the Aga Khan Foundation and Aga Khan Development Network workers that were working for Tajikistan, they were immediately brought back to Tajikistan. So they all left, and that probably also included all of the expats working with them. I doubt the expats stayed there and then the Tajiks left, because they often work hand in hand. There's a group of Canadians, Pakistanis, Americans that all work side by side with the Tajiks and the Afghans in those Afghan NGOs. So I'm sure they all left. And I haven't heard, like, from my contacts in the districts that I'm in contact with people, there's no foreigners there right now. But, you know, in the middle of the country, or let's say some random education NGO worker that's working in Nuristan that's kind of stuck, who knows? They're probably desperately trying to get in touch with people. And I don't know how that's working. I don't know how the phones are, you know, there's so much chaos, really.
Yeah. So recently the Taliban has put out statements to the effect that it's a Taliban 2.0, a nicer, gentler Taliban. What is your assessment of, just in general, just to sort of wrap this up, of where is Afghanistan going? What kind of stories are we going to hear in the next few months? And I realize I'm putting you in a position where you have to speculate, but assuming, yeah.
This is like reading the tea leaves where there's a hurricane in the cup, you know?
Yeah.
So that's just so we know that's what Paul's asking me to do. The hurricane in the teacup. But I would say that I have been sent images and videos through various, like WhatsApp, Signal, whatever, these different forms of brutal beatings, bloody. I have been sent recordings of people I know begging me for help that are screaming and crying, and I'm hearing screaming in the background. It's very disturbing. So my judgment of the Taliban at the moment is definitely clouded by that. But if I put aside my extreme emotional sort of reaction to that, I can say that so far in the Wakhan corridor, there's only been a little bit of imposition on girls' education, but they are kind of allowing girls to get educated. And there hasn't been many other changes except for the Taliban are in charge and control the trafficking and the borders. Ishkashim, there was a little bit of scuffle, or from what I understand, a little bit of tension, but not a lot. Shugnon, Shugnon is another district. So, okay. Wait. So Wakhan is here.
Mhm.
There's been really no major fighting there. Ishkashim is here. There's been a little bit of tension. This is a major drug trafficking hub.
Mhm.
And that goes down into here, into Zibak and Wardouch. Zibak and Wardouch have been sort of under minute fighting on and off between, the government forces and the Afghan and the Taliban groups have been back and forth for a while, sort of fighting in there. And then Shugnon has had a Taliban shadow government group that's been working in this border area for a while. So speaking to those in particular, it hasn't been awful, but when you get to districts like there's fighting in Kunduz, there's fighting in Panjshir, there's fighting in Balkh, there's been human rights abuses in Herat, from what I understand, in Helmand and Kandahar as well. In Spin Boldak, from what I understand, there was some really there was some killing and revenge killing and whatnot going on in Spin Boldak. Jalalabad, where they took over, was there's some violence. So there's protests going on, but there's also revenge going on. So there's like several different types of chaos. And I should break that down. One is the people are resisting and protesting, like in Panjshir, and some in Balkh, and some in a couple other areas. Then there's the Taliban that are taking revenge. And then there's the whole, like in Balkh, where they declared that any girl over the age of 12 could be taken by a Taliban fighter as a wife. So basically into sexual slavery. And that's gone on. I think that has gone on in Herat and some of the other areas too. The women in Afghanistan, the women, this sounds awful, but women from different provinces are considered more valuable in terms of like a Sunni dowry. So Badakhshan, the women are worth a lot. Herat area worth a lot. So it's a really disgusting, I'm going to judge it, but so the Taliban that are there or the foreign fighters are going to consider those women as part of their bounty. So I can imagine going forward, that could get worse. People might resist that more. And the other problem that I see, which is going to cause chaos, is the Taliban groups seem to have no idea how to maintain really simple things like banks, the economics, the phone, there's all the infrastructure, and the Afghans had actually developed they were very well developed in many ways. And their armies are kind of like just a bunch of, rabble-rouser sort of young Taliban fighters. They're not professional military. And so that's going to cause unnecessary pain and violence for people when those untrained, ideologically driven forces are suddenly in charge of a village. So I mean, what I see, and after saying all that, is unless the Taliban can formalize their ability to actually govern, since now they're supposedly governing the country, there's going to be chaos all over the place. And people are going to get hungry. They're going to protest. I mean, there's some people already running out of food because the supply lines aren't running in some places. Now, in other places, I'm told the Taliban are asking civil servants to stay in their positions so they can continue running the country. So I don't know how I'm hoping actually those negotiations happen. It's kind of like, I know I'm going on, but it's kind of like in Iraq when they got rid of the Baathists. That was a terrible thing for the state. So if the Taliban are smart enough to keep that same kind of civil servant group in place in some areas or bring them back, they could begin to limit some chaos. But again, you have these young fighters who are suddenly in charge of the security, who are supposed to not be taking revenge, who are taking revenge.
Yeah.
So Yeah, so I mean, it's complicated. Did I answer that?
Yeah, no, it was a great answer. I put you in a tight spot there, asking for a prediction, and you handled it very well. That was really good.
Thank you. I appreciate
So
that.
no, I really appreciate the insights, and this is obviously an evolving situation.
Yeah,
And so I hope that we can have another conversation, perhaps in the near-term future, to sort of assess as things have progressed. And so, but for now, I want to thank you for your time and your remarks and your insights. These have been very, very helpful, and we wish you well, and we miss you.
oh, thank you.
Okay.
My pleasure. Next time we have to talk about Afghan women, please.
Yes, that's the next topic.
Okay.
All right. For now, goodbye, everyone.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Hi, bye.